At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Dr. Orman, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Dr. Doug. Thanks for having me on your show.
Hey, it's great to have you on the show. This is going to be really interesting because I've talked to a few people about how those emotions really create a response of anger and frustration and so forth. So I think this is going to be really a great conversation, but I'd like for you to share with the audience your background and how did you end up getting to the point where you got involved in this area and wrote your book?
Yeah. So I am an internal medicine doctor, have been so for 50 years, practiced for 23 years in a medical practice, and then spent 15 years as a corporate medical director. So I've been in the medical field. And then for 40 of those 50 years, I've also had a side interest in psychology and in helping people eliminate anger and stress, which has been an area of expertise of mine. So and I got into both those areas because I had a lot of anger and stress myself as a young man, as a young physician, going through medical school, medical training, and also my first few years of practice. I used to get angry all the time. I used to get angry at my patients if they didn't follow my advice. I'd get angry at the drop of a dime. I don't know if you ever saw John McEnroe play tennis in his heyday.
Yeah.
And I took up tennis in my late 20s, and I was literally not tennis wise, but anger wise, I was literally like John McEnroe on the tennis court, smashing my racket, yelling at myself if I had missed a shot, and annoying the people playing, on either side of me, and I just couldn't control it, and it was really it felt horrible, I was successful professionally, but personally I didn't feel successful because I had a lot of anxiety, I had a lot of anger. My relationships all failed one after another, and I couldn't fix any of those things. And I was used to fixing things. If there was a problem, I figured out a way to solve it. So that drove me to go into personal development work because I tried all the standard anger management, stress management stuff. It didn't help that much. Every day I'd still wake up, be the same angry guy. So I got into personal development work, and eventually I cobbled together a bunch of stuff from different people that I'd studied with, and I hit on something that finally enabled me to get my hands on the controls of my anger and to be able to turn it off in ways that I never even imagined were possible because I really didn't understand anger as a human emotion. Despite all my training and even dabbling in psychology and all that stuff, I still had big blind spots as to what was really going on. And once I figured out what was going on, then I was easily able, not easily, but I mean, it took a little while, but I was eventually able to get rid of most of my anger. And then I started teaching people how to do the same thing because I knew it was so important as a doctor. I knew the anger was so very important for people's health and well-being. So I needed to share these insights that I had.
Well, and let's talk about that for a minute because when we talk about stress, we talk about anger. What happens to the body system and what does that create that can cause all sorts of physical ailments?
Yeah, well, for me, anger is a subset of stress. In other words, stress is like the big umbrella term.
Right.
And there's lots of different stressful problems we can have in life, and anger is one of them. Anxiety is another one. So financial problems, family relationship problems. All
Right.
those are kind of under the umbrella of stress, but all of them can stir up our physiology, can cause abnormal hormones to be secreted, cortisol, epinephrine, all these things. It can raise your blood pressure, can affect your immune system, can do all kinds of things that lead to heart attacks and strokes and autoimmune diseases and stuff that we still don't understand. We only have touched the tip of the iceberg, as to what stress can do and what anger can do physiologically and health-wise. But there's a lot of stuff that in the health arena that it has negative consequences, not to mention, its effect on marriages, relationships with our kids, and just all kinds of things, your career, decision making, getting addicted to substances, having accidents. There's so many different, downstream negative consequences of having a lot of anger and stress, that it's a big health problem. And most physicians are really aware of it, and other health professionals are aware of it. It's just that the solutions haven't been all that great until recently.
No, and you mentioned cortisol. Is that one of the major factors in health that is affected when the cortisol level is raised during the anger and the stress and so forth, and then it just kind of stays up there because we never learn how to get rid of that? And what are some of the very specific effects of high cortisol in an
Yeah,
individual
it's called the
system?
stress. It's called the stress hormone. I'm not sure we understand all of its many implications, but it can it raises blood pressure. It actually affects the brain as far as our ability to think and reason, and it has it has effects all throughout the body and almost every organ system of the body. So it's one of the hormones that has multiple effects, some of which are positive, but when the levels go high, then it can cause difficulties. It can raise your blood sugar. It can aggravate diabetes. There's a whole bunch of things that it can do that are not, do not promote our health, but actually detract from our health.
Well, and the reason I ask that is because I know that oftentimes as the audience is listening, there's those, and I've done this not with anger, but with other things, and I hear something and I go, yeah, well, that's not me. And, and so we talk about anger, and I'm sure some of the people out there are saying, no, I don't have anger, or I don't have stress, and yet they're experiencing some physical ailments. And
Yes.
I think it's important for people to understand that their health literally is affected by
Yeah.
these emotions, by these situations. So you ended up writing a book. What's the name of your book?
The most recent book that I wrote is called Dr. Orman's Life-Changing Anger Cure. And what I do in that book is I have a coaching program that I take people through. It's a 10-session coaching program I can do over Zoom, 10 one-hour sessions. And it literally can take people who've been angry all their lives and nothing's helped them, and they've gone to therapy and they've gone to anger management. They're still angry. And in 10 one-hour sessions, I can show them a whole new way of understanding anger and dealing with it, so that at the end of those 10 sessions, they have a lot more control over their anger than they ever had before. Many of them stop getting angry at things that used to trigger them all the time. They just have a completely new understanding of this very common human emotion, which we've been struggling with for thousands of years. But they have a new way to understand it that actually gives them control instead of their anger being in control of them most of the time. So I put everything that I teach in that program into that book so that people literally can get the book and don't have to go through the program. The only thing I couldn't do in the book is coach people individually on an anger situation, the personal situation they might have. Oh, I'm angry at my sister because she did this, and that, or I'm angry at my spouse because every time this happens, those kinds of unique situations I couldn't directly, coach them on, but I give a lot of examples how you can apply the principles in the book to any anger situation, specific situation you have. So the whole blueprint is there, all the tools are there, the insights. You can literally take that book and change your life with regard to anger, so that you have much less of it and you have much less of the negative consequences from it.
Okay, so what came to my mind immediately was the saying, since, we're both doctors, physician, heal thyself.
Yes.
And you know what? Think about it. How many times when you've had if you have had any serious situations or even reasonably serious situations, have you healed yourself versus going to another specialist to get some help?
Well, that's where this all came from. It came 40 years ago. Like I said, I had a lot of anger in my 20s and 30s, and went through personal development, and I figured out, what I was missing, what I wasn't understanding about anger, and it surprised the hell out of me that I was able to turn everything around. Because if you'd asked me back then, did I ever see a possibility that I would stop being an angry person, or that I have much less anger than I've had over those last couple decades, I would have said, no, that's just who I am. That's my personality. I don't think it's ever going to change. And that's only because I didn't really understand the process of how anger
Yeah.
gets generated inside all of us. And so once I figured that out, and applied it to myself, literally, I healed myself first. And
Okay.
once I saw that it worked, I said, well, I got to get this out into the world. I mean, this is really an important health problem that people need to know. There's some answers for now, that can really make a difference. And that's when I started writing and teaching and doing workshops and speaking. And I've been doing that for 40 years on anger and stress, to just share what I learned with people that helped me with my anxiety, with my relationship issues, with my anger issues, all the stuff that I figured out how to finally, conquer, that I kept
Well,
knocking my head against the wall all those years.
yeah, and as we're seeing now, I mean, I opened up the news just a while
Hmm.
ago.
Hmm.
The anger
Hmm.
that is existing on the campuses,
Yeah.
the anti-Semitism, and that's just one area
Yeah.
of anger that we see. What, why is there so much of this unnecessary anger and hatred and violence in the world? What's going on in your basic opinion?
In my opinion, with what I've learned, um, worldwide, there's a basic misunderstanding of where anger comes from. We don't really understand why we're feeling angry. We think we understand. We look at the situations outside of us that bother us, that trigger us to get angry, but we don't really understand how the anger gets generated in our body from that. We think it's like a direct cause effect, one causes two, because we see the things we don't like, we feel the anger immediately. It looks like it's a direct 1-2 cause effect relationship. So that's the model that common sense wise we have about where our anger comes from. And what I discovered 40 years ago, to my surprise, is that anger is generated by it's a four-step process. It's not a two-step process. There's three causes and then the anger. But two of the three causes are invisible. They're because they're inside of us. So there's the thing in the outside world. There's what the Israelis are doing, what the Palestinians are doing, whatever it is, what the government is doing.
So it's the event. Well, number one is the
The
event.
event or whatever, what our spouse said, what our boss did, whatever,
Yeah.
all that stuff, and then we feel the anger. But there's two steps in the middle that are inside our bodies and our brains, and we don't understand that, and we're missing two of the three critical puzzle pieces to understand where our anger is actually coming from. And that's why people can't control their anger or can't do anything about their anger, because they're totally in the dark and they've really been badly educated and badly informed. You talk about misinformation. Everybody talks about misinformation politically, but there's a tremendous amount of misinformation in psychology, in health fields, where people just don't understand the reality of why things happen. And our emotions is one of the biggest areas where there's a lack of emotional intelligence. Even the emotional intelligence movement lacks intelligence in terms of understanding why emotions occur. I've seen very little good, solid, helpful information from the emotional intelligence crowd. There's a lot of talk about, well, if you handle your emotions well, you do better in life, which is true. But they don't tell you, well, if I'm a person that doesn't handle my emotions well, how do I get to be a person that does? They're not very good at that. Okay.
Well,
And
and yeah,
that's what I like to teach people how to do. Go from being not so good to being fantastic at handling your emotions. Yeah.
and I love that. It's interesting how, and I'm sure you observe this in the area of medicine that you were involved in, that so often there are common misnomers about a particular issue, a particular health issue. And yet some people, for instance, in my dental practice, and I share this a lot, that I actually studied with President Kennedy's personal physician on treating head and neck pain. And it was fascinating because in dentistry, they call it TMJ. And you may have heard that terminology, all right?
Sure.
So people would walk into my office and go, "Oh, doctor, I have TMJ." And I'm looking at it and I'm going, "Well, wait a minute. No, you have two TMJs. You've got one on the right and one on the left. What's your problem? What's the system? What's the symptom that you're experiencing?" And so then they talk about headaches or whatever that happens to be. And it's only then that I can get into saying, okay, let's discover whether it's a neurological issue, whether it's a muscle issue, or whether it's a skeletal muscle issue, whatever it is, and then get in and help them with that. And so often, do you see that happen? Did you see that happening a lot in internal medicine, where you would see that same kind of thing going on? So I find it fascinating that you talk about the fact, and you're right, so many people that talk about emotional intelligence and all of that type of stuff just get on this bandwagon and they don't get to the real causation, the root
Yes,
cause.
yes.
So, number one, what is one of those root causes that are totally unknown to us subconsciously?
What we don't understand about ourselves as human beings is we don't really see the events that happen in the world as they actually are. Everything we perceive comes through filters. Our brain filters all the data that's coming in. So there's just so much data coming in. And this goes back to prehistoric times. There's just so much data coming in that the brain can't process it all. So it had to kind of chunk it down, simplify it, make it into some, you had to make quick decisions. Do I run? Do I stay? Is this dangerous? Is it not? And the brain just had to chunk things down enough so that we could make decisions and stay alive. Okay. But we've inherited that mechanism where the brain doesn't just perceive things accurately, it leaves out a lot of stuff and it reduces stuff and simplifies stuff, like cause effect relationships, for example. The brain wants to simplify that to, one causes two. And in real life, there can be a whole bunch of causes involved simultaneously, but our brains can't capture it all very easily unless we stop and really deeply think about it. But anyhow, so we're programmed, automatically programmed to see things not as they really are, but in distorted sort of ways based on the different filters we have. And as we go through life, we each develop our own set of filters because based on our life experience. But some are cultural, some are social. They get ingrained in us. And anger actually, most emotions come from different sets of filters that we view life through. And if you believe that what you're seeing is true through those filters, then you get the appropriate emotion. So there are three filters, primary filters that cause anger. In other words, there's three ways you have to be looking at things in order to feel angry. And you have to believe each of those three things is true. And if you do, then you get angry. Okay. And they're not very different. They're not very, you don't have to be a psychiatrist.
No.
You and I as doctors and dentists, we can even understand. So
Yeah.
it's very simple. Very simple. The three filters are, first you have to see something as somebody doing something bad or wrong they shouldn't have done. So, we don't get angry if we think somebody's doing something wonderful or terrific or
Right.
fantastic. Okay. So immediately we have to see it as bad and wrong. We have to see some hurt or harm or negative impact coming from that bad and wrong behavior. Okay. And the third thing is we have to see that person who's doing, or thing, could be your computer that you're angry at, it's doing a bad and wrong thing, it's not working properly, whatever. We have to see that entity that's doing the bad and wrong thing as being pretty much unilaterally or 100% responsible or to blame. So we have these very narrow blinders of blame where that's all we focus on is what that person did or didn't do. And that's the story that we tell ourselves. Somebody did something bad and wrong, somebody was hurt or harmed, somebody was to blame, and then we get angry. Okay?
Okay, and I want to stop you there for a minute because as you brought up in the first place, that's totally based on their perception, is it not? And their
Everything is based on our
perception,
perception.
and
Yeah.
their perception is totally, well, almost totally based on those subconscious imprints that have been placed, as you said, by society, by school, by teachers, by religion,
Yeah.
by all of those type of things that may not be, in fact, quote, true.
Yeah, or they're partially true, but they leave out a lot of stuff. And if
Yes,
there's a lot of holes and gaps in the understanding of reality, and if you had those missing pieces, you might not react, emotionally as intensely as you did, or even at all in the same way. You literally, when you fill in those missing gaps, and that's what our brain does, our brain creates the gaps, but
right.
our brain also sells it to us as the whole truth. So it's really like the media. Our brains function just like the media. They give you a spun version of whatever it is they want you to believe, okay? And they don't
Yeah.
tell you what they're leaving out. They sell you what the narrative as the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And our brains are used to buying partial narratives as being complete narratives. And so we're accepting a distorted, incomplete view as being the whole view. And that is why we get so emotional. By the way, people in the media know how to provoke human emotions. That's
Oh,
their
yeah.
business model.
No
And they
question
do it
about
in
it.
exactly this way. They give us distorted viewpoints of what happened, knowing full well that it's going to trigger us to feel angry because we're going to see somebody doing something bad wrong, we're going to see the hurt and harm, and we're going to blame that person. They know that's how you create anger in human beings, and their business model depends on being good at doing that. And our brains do the same thing. One of the things I say is that our brains create more fake news every day than all the media outlets, in the world. We're just constantly generating fake news and believing it, because we think it's true. And a lot of times, if we stopped and examined it and asked some simple questions, we say, "Oh, well, I guess I was missing this, or I guess I didn't see that, or I guess this was left out of the picture." And our whole emotional state will change once we see the world differently and see how things happen differently.
Well, and you talk about that fake news, but you talk about how our brain creates that. I smile because I get on TikTok once in a while because I do some short reels on TikTok,
Uh-huh.
and literally, I have seen some statements that I know as I go in and verify it one way or the other are absolutely 100% untrue.
Hmm.
There's no question about it. And
Yep.
yet, people who listen to that, all of a sudden it becomes true for them.
Yes. Yes. That's how it works. And then they get angry. And then they get angry.
And they get angry. Yeah.
And they don't. We, as an outside observer, we can see they got angry because they bought into an untruth that, and it felt true to them. Okay. And we can see what's happening, but they can't because they're in the middle of it. And it looks and feels true to them.
Well, and as we talk about the world situation right now, and I see this a lot in even smaller situations, but you have certain people that really get angry, all right,
Hmm.
for whatever reason, and then they are able to instill anger in others to the point that you get a crowd anger.
Yes. Well, they're just fortifying and reinforcing the filters that somebody did something bad and wrong. So they tell you all the bad and wrong things that they did. They point out all the hurt and harm and damage that was done by their bad and wrong behavior. Okay. And they tell you that these people are 100% responsible to blame. Nothing else was involved. It was just them. And they know that that's just like the media. They know that if they keep giving you that narrative, it's going to create anger in you because that's how we generate anger as human beings. But nobody's ever told us or taught us that that's how anger gets generated. I went through 7 years of medical education, never a whiff of any of this
Yeah,
stuff. I did
I
I did a
know.
lot of psychology study on my own, never really encountered this kind of understanding, and had to hit on it upon it on my own, fortunately. And then once you see how your anger is being generated inside of you, you can do something about it. I'll give you an example. My wife and I are about to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary, which, by the way, would never have happened had I not figured this anger stuff out, because every one
Okay.
of my relationships until my mid 30s crashed and burned, spectacularly a lot because of my anger issues. But anyhow,
Right.
so by the time we got married, I had gotten rid of most of my anger. My wife didn't have a lot of anger. So consequently, we never had a lot of anger in our relationship. We didn't get into fights. We didn't get into knockdown, drag out arguments. We didn't have any of that stuff. But early on in our relationship, there was this one weird situation where we would start to fight with each other. And it was so unusual for us that it stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, if you're arguing all the time, you wouldn't notice it, but we weren't. So the one time we started arguing, it was like, what is this? And it turned out it was only on car trips, if we went on a car trip somewhere. And even more interesting, it never happened on the drive to our destination. We never got into arguments when we were at the place that at our destination. It only happened driving home.
Oh, wow.
And usually I would be driving, and we'd be driving home, and somewhere along the way, my wife would say, "Oh, there's something over here I'd really like to go see. It's only like an hour off of our path. I'd really like to go see it." And I would go like, "No, we're not doing that." And she would go like, "What do you mean we're not doing that?" And I would say, "No, we're not doing that." To me, so I saw her wanting to deviate from the straight path home as being a bad and wrong thing that she was doing. Okay, because in my family, when we went on car trips and when we left, we drove directly home. We stopped for gas, for food, but we never
Right.
would deviate. Her family was completely different. They would always go off path and do these side trips and everything. So when she asked for that, to me, it was like a wrongdoing, you know? And I would have a tone in my voice. I would be upset and angry, and she would perceive that. And then she would wonder, well, why am I, you know, she didn't deserve that. And then she would get angry at me. And then, so once I went back and I said, okay, let me see what's happening. Okay, I'm angry. Let me look at the first filter. Am I thinking she's doing something bad and wrong? Yes, I'm thinking she's doing something bad and wrong. Now I ask the important question. Is she really doing something bad and wrong? In truth. And the minute I asked that question, I said, well, not really. She's just wants to do something differently the way I think it should be done. But if I ask myself, is it really wrong? No, it's not really wrong. It's just she has her preference, I have my preference. Neither one's right or wrong. And once I saw that I kind of automatically, my brain automatically judged her as being wrong for asking to go off course. And I saw it wasn't wrong. It was just her preference. The minute I saw that, I said, okay, this is a stupid thing for me to get angry about. You know, she's not wrong. It's just she has her preference, I have mine. It's a marriage, you know, we support each other, we try to make each other happy. So from that point on, my whole view of that situation changed. So every time she wanted to deviate from where we were going, I would say, sure, honey, if you want to go there, let's go do it. Because my view of the situation had expanded and changed, it became more truthful. And I no longer saw her as committing a wrongdoing that was somehow negatively impacting me. I saw it as, well, it's just a difference of preference. And fundamentally, so I eliminated completely for the rest of our 8.5 years, whatever it was, we never have that argument anymore because I never look at the situation the same way anymore. I've completely eliminated that anger episode, which was one of the few ones that we had. And that's what's possible for all of our anger. If you can see beyond that initial knee-jerk perception where you see somebody who's doing something wrong and hurting and harming and being responsible, there's lots more stuff that gets left out from those three narratives. If you can fill in some of the gaps, the anger will diminish and sometimes completely go away.
Okay, so you had mentioned two. Did that include both, or is there another element here that is subconscious that we're not even aware of?
There are two. Good thing.
Okay.
Yes. So the first one is the first invisible cause. I remember I said there's 3 steps and then the anger.
Okay.
It's not one step and then the anger. It's one step followed by 2 more. Those 2 are invisible, and then the anger. So it's a 4-step process. The first one of those 2 steps is the filters.
Okay.
That I just explained. Okay. And people should really take this and write them down on a Post-it note, on a sticky note. Somebody did something bad and wrong they shouldn't have done. Somebody was hurt or harmed or negatively impacted. And the person who did the wrongdoing was 100% responsible or to blame. Every time you are angry about anything, big anger, the kind of road rage, punching a hole in the wall, down to I'm just annoyed, I'm irritated, I'm standing in line, things aren't moving as fast as I'd like. Any range of anger whatsoever always comes from those 3 filters. You're always looking at the situation from those 3 filters. So it's the 3 filters. The second invisible cause is our brains follow up on, first our brains are doing the filtering. And then our brains say to us, there's no filtering going on. You're perceiving what's true. Our brain stamps it as true and sells it to us as true. And usually we buy it, okay? So our brain is not letting us question or try to see past whatever the filters are telling us. It's saying that we're true. And you want to know what's even worse? That's how anger gets created, with those 2 extra steps. See through the filters. Brain tells you what you're seeing is absolutely true. Don't question it. Don't look for anything else. Okay, that generates the anger. Now look what happens. The anger now makes us feel justified in what we're seeing.
Yeah.
It makes us feel like we're right, which is like a double whammy, and just encourages us to believe that we're true and we're justified and our anger is righteous and we have every reason, every right to feel that way, and everybody else should feel that way. And it's underneath it all are these distorted perceptions that we don't even realize is what caught us up in the anger.
Well, and
we have the presence of mind to stop and go back and reflect.
It's interesting that, we have to be right. It's an interesting thing about the ego. You talk about the brain, we talk about the ego.
Yeah.
people have to be right, and that can be such, as you bring up, that can be such a dangerous
Yeah. But,
attitude to
but
have, and
remember,
yet
it
it's
evolved.
something that we all have.
It evolved that way because it kept us alive.
Yes.
Because we had to make these quick decisions, these either or, right, wrong, harm, no harm, and we had, whether we were right or not, we had to believe we were right because we had to act.
Right.
And it's better if if you mistakenly think there's a saber-toothed tiger and it's just a bird rustling the branch near you, and you run, okay, you're alive. You get to play again. But if you make mistake the other way and you say, "Oh, I'm going to poo-poo, it's no big deal," and then it turns out to be a saber-toothed tiger, you're gone. Okay, so this needing to be right um, had survival value, which is why we've inherited it today. And so it has benefits, but it also, like we're talking about here, it has huge problems associated with it too. It causes a lot of unnecessary suffering and angst and anxiety and anger and guilt and all these other things because we think we're right about our perceptions, and a lot of times we're not.
Okay, so we go through that whole process. We go through the filters. Our brain says, yeah, we're right.
Uh-huh.
What brings about the behavior that exhibits the anger? Because sometimes there's no outward behavior. A lot of times it's just that
Yeah,
internal, the cortisol level
yeah,
rises and on and
yeah.
so forth. But in most cases, as you said, in most cases, people get angry, they shout, they yell, they hit, they do whatever that happens to be. What brings about that type of activity from that anger that their brain has identified?
It's the same thing. It's conditioning. Okay, so and each person is different. So it depends on the family you grow up in, depends upon how anger was treated in your family, in your community, and your peer groups, whatever. Some people learn to not express anger, that it's dangerous. Okay, some people learn, to let it all out and just release it. But the thing you have to realize, the thing is, these are questions that come once the anger is built up already.
Right.
Then there's the question, well, okay, what do I do with it now? How do I express it? Don't I express it? If I do express it, how do I express it? If I don't express it, what do I do to keep that from bottling up inside of me and causing other problems? So these are all things we've developed solutions for, lots of time individual solutions for, and then those become programmed as our patterned habits of behavior in responding to anger when it builds up inside of us. What I like to do is what we're talking about here is showing people how to stop the anger from building up inside of you so you don't have to worry about that downstream, those
Uh,
problems,
Good
the
point.
cycles.
Get
If you're
get
not
the get
generating
the
it, then
yeah.
you don't have to worry about any of that stuff.
Get the root cause handled, and you don't have to worry about the rest of it. That's
Yeah,
interesting. So
yeah.
you shared, and I appreciate the transparency of you sharing your experience with your wife. What are some of the other examples you've had with clients that have really been, really interesting that you could share?
Well, years ago, I had a guy that came to me, a small business owner, a lot of anger, a lot of stress, and he had seen two prominent mental health professionals in our area, a stress management psychologist he worked with for 3 months, couldn't help him. Finally, threw up his hands and said, "You need to see a psychiatrist." Wasn't happy about that, but he went to see the psychiatrist. After 2 sessions, the psychiatrist kicked him out, said, "You don't really have what it takes to do well in psychotherapy. Go back to the psychologist you were working with." And then finally, out of frustration, a friend referred him to me, and I started working with him. And in just 5 sessions, he started to see improvement in his anger and stress for the first time in his life. And he was a guy who was totally written off by traditionally well trained, very successful, prominent mental health professionals. They just didn't have this particular understanding of stress and anger that I had. And I could help this guy like immediately when he had been struggling for years, and more recently with the help of some professionals where they couldn't do anything for him. And it was all because they had the traditional stress management sort of mindset, and I didn't. And I had a different way of understanding these human problems. And the guy was a champ. I mean, he really turned his whole life around as far as stress is concerned. And he had great success. I had another guy that was in his 60s, been angry all of his life. Everybody in his family was angry, and he was starting to have problems with his marriage, his second marriage. Starting to have problems. He finally came to me because his wife gave him an ultimatum, and he came to me and told me about this history of whole life of anger. And I said, "No problem, we can fix that." And so he went through my 10 session program. The guy was like a completely different human being. I mean, he didn't even get angry on the golf course anymore, where he used to always, yell and scream if he hit a bad shot or something like that. He stopped doing that. His wife was just amazed at how much he changed in a short period of time. I mean, these changes are entirely, if you have the right understanding and you have the missing puzzle pieces, which most people don't have, even many people in the anger field don't have them. Okay.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you have the right pieces and you have all the pieces of the puzzle, it's easy to figure out solutions and to help people.
Well, and one thing that comes to my mind, and I'm sure you're aware, I interview a lot of different people about a lot of different things, and you're hitting on some very interesting points. One of the first things you talk about is with those filters. And oftentimes those filters are really a result of our perception, which is a result of those subconscious imprints that have been placed on us as children. And,
Yes.
and obviously, as we grow older, they still get there. So, have you found, because I haven't heard you talk a lot about, what a lot of people do is getting in and talking about those subconscious belief systems and so forth, and somehow figuring out how to root those out or let them go. What have you found in your experience with the methodology that you're using in teaching people, which they're seeing incredible results with? What happens to all that subconscious stuff?
I don't have to get involved with that. I assume it's there. I agree with you. It's there probably, but I don't need it to relieve them of their anger. All they need to know is those three filters. And they're the same in all. That's part of the unconscious programming that we all get stuck with. Is somebody did something bad, wrong, somebody was hurt and harmed, somebody was unilaterally to blame. We have those three prominent, conversations going on all the time, and all people have to. And it doesn't matter where they came from or how in that individual they got cemented so strongly. That's what's causing their anger. However they got there doesn't really matter in the sense of now this is what you're stuck with. Every time you get angry, these three filters got activated. Now the question is, what can I do about those three filters? And that's where you need to step in and start questioning them and start telling the truth. And it doesn't matter what your past history has been or how they got there. There are problems for you right now in the moment. Are they true or are they not true? And you have to figure that out each time, and you have to ask those questions each time. And that's really what relieves the anger. So you don't need to process all the who struck John and how that's, who dropped you on your head when you were 3 and all this kind of stuff, because it still boils down to, is it true that they did something bad wrong? Is it true that negative, hurt and harm was occurred? Is it true that they were 100% responsible, unilaterally to blame, or were there other causes involved? And those are the questions you need to keep wrestling with.
Okay,
And
and so really this is focusing on anger, because
this is
obviously,
purely on anger. But you know what? You
yeah.
can do the same process on any other emotion because they all come from a small set of filters. If you just know the filters that produce anxiety or that produce guilt or that produce frustration and produce sadness, it's the same process. The filters have distortions in them. The distortion, you're assuming that they're not distorted, but they are. And it's your distorted views that are causing your emotion. Now you got to figure out what's really true. When you hit on the truth, boom, the emotion goes away.
Okay,
You don't
so
have to
you
you don't have to
really become
manage anything.
mindful.
You don't have to
Yeah.
punch anything. You don't have to run 5 miles. You don't have to do deep breathing. You just get in touch with the truth about what really happened as opposed to what your filters are telling you happened. And then the emotion dissolves.
Okay, and it really boils down to really being aware, conscious,
Yes.
mindful of
Yes.
those things. And when that happens, I find this fascinating.
And
And
that's why I recommend it. I say you should write these down on an index card because you won't see them. They're invisible. But you can now have a prompt. Every time you get angry, you can pull out the index card. Not in the middle of when you're angry, but I mean when you're thinking about it later on. Pull out
yeah,
the index card. Okay, these are the three filters that got triggered that caused my anger in that situation. And you can practice remembering it. It's like training wheels. You can practice remembering. After a while, you don't need the card anymore. Okay, I got angry. Now I know I got angry.
that
And tick them off. 1, 2, 3.
that's great. So as we close up today, if there was one message that you could share with the audience that you'd like to share with them that could have an effect on them, what would that be?
Yeah, I think the main thing is not to get trapped in the myth that kind of once an angry person, always an angry person. It's not true. We stay angry not because it's part of our personality or because we're always going to be that way. It's because we're lacking the two of the three critical puzzle pieces. And if we understood those well and knew what to do with that information, we could get rid of our anger, even if we've been like the 66-year-old guy that I mentioned, angry all his life, eventually, very quickly, went to the other side and stopped being angry. It's possible for all of us to do that if we just have the right perspective, which is what I talk about in my book, and I give people the whole 9 yards of how you do it, how you understand it, where it all comes from, what you can do with those knowledge of the three filters and everything. It's literally anyone can get that book and read it and release themselves from a lot of the anger. And this could be anger you've been holding on to for years.
Right.
Grudges and chronic resentments from past failed relationships, or how your parents treated you, or how your ancestors were treated. All that stuff can be released if you're able to get in touch with the distortions that your filters are creating.
Okay, so let's talk about the book again. Dr. Orman's Life-Changing Anger Cure. Where did they find it?
It's on Amazon right now. They can just look under Life-Changing Anger Cure. They'll find it.
Okay, and how do they find you?
I have a website, docorman.com. And also there's a free download that I have available for people called The Best Anger Elimination Method You Can Find. And for that, you go to theangersolution.org and you can download that, and that'll get you on my email list so they can be in touch with me that way. But it's a PDF they'll get that talks a lot about anger, about my 10-session program, and also a little bit about, at the end, a little bit about the book and how they can get a hold of that.
Perfect. Hey, thanks for being on the show, Mort. I think this is a fascinating area, and what fascinates me is, here are so many people, and you are one of those specific ones that had this entirely different career, but ultimately you have moved into an entirely different area where you're helping people in a different way than you were as an internal medicine physician.
Yeah, but
and I think that's great.
I still feel like this is me being a physician.
Yes. Oh, no. No question about that. I just find it fascinating how in our lives, as we get older, we find that there are other areas we go into that we are still able to make a difference in other people's lives, just in a different way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, folks.
I feel blessed that now that I'm no longer practicing medicine and patching people up I still have the opportunity to impact their lives, improve their health and their well-being. And it's still great that I can continue to live out that mission.
Absolutely. Hey, well, folks, thanks for listening. I hope you'll take this to heart, get a hold of that book. And if you're experiencing the anger, here's a solution to get rid of that. But even more importantly, get rid of that and start to be even healthier. So this is Dr. Doug saying have a great week.